heard you say you learned a long time ago that you have to put your ego in check and this work isn't about you. Is that a lesson that you feel like you've learned and moved on from?
I try to be a student of sort of all things leadership and organizational development. And, you know, at the core of that is the only person I'm better than is the person I was yesterday.
Hello, Loren.
Hi, Kelsey. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Great.
Super excited for today's episode. We have TJ Logan, the Associate Vice President for Residential Experience at the Ohio State University.
And a recent recipient of the James Grimm Leadership and Service Award by the Association of College University Housing Officers International, which is really a coveted award. So I'm really, really thrilled to have him with us.
Well-deserved award for TJ. Definitely. He has spent most of his career, if not all of his career, associated with the Kuhoai. So I think his relationship with them, the history he has there, I love that they honored him in that way.
Yeah, and the fact that it's a leadership award is appropriate because he studies leadership. Today's conversation is about leadership, and I think we're going to hear really, really fantastic insights about how decisions are made, how to assure that credibility is part of those decision-making processes, and when to say quiet things out loud, as we'll hear today.
One of his favorite sayings.
Yeah.
I also think it's great that he talks about his experience at multiple universities, Kent State, University of Florida, Temple, and now at the Ohio State.
The Ohio State.
I think we see some lessons learned along the way, and he is not short on a quote.
Not short on a quote, and very insightful and thoughtful as he shares those. I think our listeners in for a real treat.
I agree. Let's hear from TJ.
Let's do it.
Hey, TJ, we're so excited to have you here with us today. Let's get started with one of our favorite questions. How do you describe your job to a rideshare driver?
I like the way you frame this question. Sort of, how would you describe your job to like a rideshare driver, or, you know, what's your elevator pitch? In other words, or many times in higher ed, we say, you know, how would you explain your job to your family, because they don't necessarily understand what it is that you do. And when I think about that, sort of explaining it in a layman's perspective, you know, I always say, I say I work in higher ed, and everybody will say, oh, are you a professor? That's usually the first frame of reference. And my answer, well, no, I oversee the things generally that make money. Things like housing, things like dining, things like facilities. And then to make it super relatable, I'll usually say, you know, we're kind of like Disney World without the rides. Right. Or without the fun. We make sure that the buildings are running. We make sure the buildings are running. We make sure that there's food, and that there's housing, and that there's an experience, and that people are as safe as they humanly can be. And we try to do it in the most effective way possible to ensure that the experience is affordable. That's kind of the pitch of how I describe the stuff that we do is we oversee the stuff that is outside the classroom that folks don't generally think about.
Yeah. Love it. Love that answer.
When a faculty member asks you what you do you have a different answer?
Yeah, I mean, I leave out the not fun part or the Disney World part. I tend to, I mean, I think faculty generally, the fun part about working directly with that group is that you have an opportunity to educate them on the colors of money and how things actually work in the background. Like, I'm engaged right now in this huge campus-wide master planning exercise, and every corner that we turn, I have this responsibility of reminding folks like, oh, not all dollars are created equally. Not all things are funded in the same way. Some things contribute directly to affordability while others don't. So I can't tell you the number of times I've had the conversation of, hey, why can't you guys just give us free housing for this? Or give us a thing for this. And it's a viewpoint that just lacks the nuance of understanding that everything needs to be paid for. And so oftentimes in conversations with faculty, it ends with me asking a question, which is, everything needs to be paid for. You let me know who pays for it. I'm willing to do whatever. I just want to make sure that it happens the right way. So if you want an early move-in program and you want the housing and the food to be free, let me know who do I charge? You know, what student subsidizes that? Do we just increase the price for everybody so that we can make it free for this population? And then it becomes a harder conversation because I guess really nothing in this case, because we deal in very, very hard goods. Nothing's free. And so I think the conversation gets a little more nuanced, and I get to educate a little bit on the business. But I also get to hear their perspective. And oftentimes I think if you're honest about it, you can get into some really good conversations about how this all works sometimes.
Mm-hmm. How does it feel to have to ask that question over and over again?
It doesn't bother me. I think for me, I've adopted it as a disarming way to because the alternative to that is just telling people no or saying I can't do it. And I'd rather engage people in a real discussion. For example, when you talk about affordable housing for families, we that conversation comes up on every campus across America. It's a different discussion to say no, this doesn't pencil, right? That's you just saying no, than to sit down and say, okay, well, it doesn't pencil, and therefore it's got to be subsidized. So let's have a real, genuine, honest discussion about how you subsidize things and how it aligns with your mission, vision, value. So I don't mind having those conversations. I think they're intellectually honest. The simple way that I like to say the quiet stuff out loud, to my own detriment sometimes, but when we say the quiet stuff out loud, I think we can have an intellectually honest conversation about how this stuff is all working and what we want to do. We can do anything, we just can't do everything. And so I beg people to name the anything, and then at what cost. And if we can have an honest conversation, I just think we can actually move on things that matter.
Agreed. When did you learn that just saying no wasn't going to get you where you needed to go in this industry or in life, really?
Yeah, I don't know if I can pinpoint the moment. I know I'm a student of leadership. I'm somebody who's always a work in progress. I'm always trying to be better at what I do. And so, I can think about moments throughout time where others have said no to me and how that felt, and then try to figure out how I'm not going to contribute to that in the future. I can think about those examples. I can also think about those folks that I've been so blessed to have as mentors who have put me in situations to understand why things go the way they go and why they don't go other ways. I remember particularly when I worked with Terry Webb at Kent State University, and he was at North Dakota, then Kent State, and I think he ended his career at Binghamton. I remember sitting and planning with Terry. I was a grad student, about how we're going to go into this meeting. This is the thing that we're essentially lobbying for, or we're trying to make the argument for, and what the outcome is that we hope for. And we had game planned, and we're going to go into this meeting, and there was a CFO in there and the whole nine. And we go in there, and within minutes, I watched him not do any of the things that we planned to do. He did a full 360, and it was, okay, we'll do this. And I remember being just so befuddled and confused at what was happening in the room, because it was way off plan. And I'm so blessed, because as a mentor, he pulled me aside afterwards and he said, let me tell you what happened in there. When you walk into a room, you have to decide whether a decision is being made or it's been made. If it's being made, you get to contribute to that. If it's been made, you need to figure out how you're going to contribute to the success of that decision that's already been made. When we walked in there, it became clear to me in moments that decision had already been made. And so we had to change our approach. And I appreciate that you didn't interrupt, you didn't stop the thing, you got on board, and that you trusted me enough to know we were going to talk about it afterward and figure out why it went the way it did. So for me, while it's not the exact sort of, don't say just no in the room, he helped me see nuance in the relationships that we have to have as we work through these types of complicated issues. And those moments are just so formative in terms of how I do the work I do now.
That is such a great piece of advice. Simple, imageable, and usable. I wonder if, as you've moved through your career, if you've been in that situation and a decision has been made,
absolutely,
but should have absolutely included your area of operation, your area of influence, or your divisions or your colleagues. What, when you detected this was a decision made without the people who should have been informing it, what kind of reaction did you have? How did you find your way back into it, or what advice do you have for people who find themselves in that situation?
So that's going to happen every day, right? Particularly the more you move throughout the organization, I upward, I think you're going to run into those things fairly regularly where decisions might feel short-sighted. If I had advice to give to folks, to me, it's grounded in moving away from your ego. I tell folks all the time, I stopped making this work about me a long, long time ago. And it was very, very liberating when I did that. When I stopped making it about my ego, about what sphere of control I had, what decisions I personally had to make, it became very freeing. And I'm able to walk into any room now. One, being able to have my radar up, is a decision being made or been made, because I carry that with me every day. In fact, I was in a meeting last week where I was thinking about that exact lesson with Terry Webb, with that piece intact. But I also walk in the room assuming the best intentions of everyone in the room. If I can leave my ego at the door and go, look, I believe all these people are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to get to the right answer. And if they made a decision that didn't involve the people that it should have, I don't think they did that maliciously. Now, I also have to ask myself, what is my responsibility in this if I believe deep, deep, deep down that there's a red flag that has not been considered here? And how do I raise that red flag in a responsible way? And so and this is that quiet stuff out loud part again, making sure the emperor isn't wearing any clothes. I sometimes have to raise my hand and say, hey, look, I don't want to jam this up. I don't want to stop the thing that's happening. This is not a speed bump. I want you to know that this is a potential outcome of this, and I think it could be problematic. And I'm here to help us solve for that. How do we fix for that? But what I don't do is say, well, here's why we can't do that, because that's not helpful. That's not productive. So my advice to folks might be just, leave your ego at the door, assume those best intentions, and then, being a problem identifier, that's easy. Anybody can find problems. Being a problem solver is what's going to make you valuable in an organization. And so take that next step. Ask the so what question.
Yeah, and raising that with care is so important, because you don't want to appear oppositional.
Right.
Now you've just excluded yourself from the next decision too. And I had it reminds me of I had a mentor boss once who said to me, everybody has a list of people they know they need to check in with before they make the big decision. You need to get on that person's list. It was about a particular thing. You need to get on that person's list. I'm like, how do I do that? But you have to get on the list, which takes time before the decision is made too. So
you have to get on the list before it's time.
That's right. Yeah. That's really what she was advising me is.
Right.
This person has a lot of influence. Will be making decisions about your area, our area. Whatever list he uses, you need to be on that. There will be 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 people on there. You need to be on that. Get busy.
Do you ever
build
feel
that relationship?
Do the two of you ever feel like there's two kinds of folks on that list? There's people that you have to check in, and it grounds the decision and helps you make the best. And then there's people you dread checking in with.
Oh yes.
Right? They're the people you're I've got to get it past this person. And how do I make that call? And so not only do I want to be on the list, like I want to be on a certain side of the ledger, right? I want to be a guy that people want to work with, right?
When I went to the University of Michigan, there was the director of public safety who, I will name him, Bill Bess. He was such an influential guy, great guy. He had a sign above his computer that said, who do I need to check with before I decide? Who do I not need to check with but thinks I do? He had these 2 lists.
Yeah.
Like, okay, there's people I just have to call because they will be upset and derailed.
That's fantastic.
That was great advice to me.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And I love the point of which side of the list do you want to be on? And how do you make that choice? I think it's how you show up day in and day out. You're making that choice. You don't get to just show up and act nice one time to be on the right side of that list.
Yeah, I've got a list of expectations. It's a document that I have been crafting for over 20 years now, and it follows me around, and it continues to evolve and grow and change. And I actually, whenever I've interviewed an organization, I actually send it ahead of time and say, this is who I am. If you want this guy, I would hire this guy. If anything on here scares you, I wouldn't hire me. It's going to be a train wreck, because this is honestly who I am. But one of the things on there that I use a lot with staff is this notion of we should be a credibility building organization. Every interaction should build credibility. And I'm clear to say that doesn't mean we say yes to everything. but it means that we build credibility even when it's a no. And I think that's at the sort of core of what you're saying, Kelsey, is that, you got to show up and you have to have credibility with your partners in a way that puts you on the right side of the ledger. So that in the event that you are a no as the decision's being made, that you have enough credibility that the no matters.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. So I want to back up and go back to your comment around I heard you say you learned a long time ago that you have to put your ego in check and this work isn't about you. Is that a lesson that you feel like you've learned and moved on from? Do you continually work on that?
Oh, yeah. Continue every day, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, I try to be a student of sort of all things leadership and organizational development. And, at the core of that is the only person I'm better than is the person I was yesterday, right? And so it's a process of thinking all the time about, hey, am I responding to this because my ego is such that this, or is this a personal response or an organizational response? Or I'm always checking that and asking that question and trying to make sure that I'm showing up in the room in a way that I would like to as a leader and as a professional. So that's a process. I was so blessed in my MBA. The first class I ever took was a leadership course with Dr. Bob Smith. And Dr. Smith was known for these quick sayings that we call Dr. Bobisms. And he had hundreds of them. I use them all the time. But one of them was, the minute that you think you have leadership figured out, you've got a lot to learn. And the minute that you figure out you've got a lot to learn, you know more than you think. And it was this concept of, if you get the concept of the fact that it is a process and never ending, you're further ahead than most of the world. And I subscribed to that as a first year grad and never let go of that, and still think that way every day in the work that I do.
So what do you do when you actually feel triggered? I feel like you're one of the most calm human beings that people interact with. I'll say I interact with. So I believe there has to be something else underneath all that calm. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But tell us about, what happens when you get triggered? What does it feel like? What do you do? How do you move through that? Or is this calm just who you are?
No, there are certainly times, and I can think of real specific examples where, I've gotten north of what that calm might look like. And I think there's some commonalities in all of those times. And it's that, I check my ego at the door. I try not to make things about me. I try to assume best intent in everybody. When something crosses a line that I think is worth cashing in the chips for, sometimes that will be accompanied by a little bit of an elevation above that calm. I can think of a situation several years ago. I won't name the institution, but I had an internal candidate for a housekeeping manager role. It was a person who was going to oversee the housekeeping operation. It was an internal candidate who had actually risen through the ranks. She was a frontline housekeeping staff years and years and years ago. She had risen all the way up through the ranks and had applied for this job. And she was the best candidate. Not only was she sort of the best on paper, had the resume, understood the organization, the whole nine yards, she had the respect of the entire staff. She was sort of this beautiful metaphor for, yes, there's growth within the organization and we can do this. And in working with our central HR organization, they said after she had applied, after she was the person we were ready to hire, they said, "Ooh, we're gonna have to rewrite the job description." Well, why? Well, it's actually, we made a mistake here. It's 3 grades above where she is now. She's not even eligible to apply for it based on our internal rules. And I went, wait. She, literally, if she was an external candidate, this conversation wouldn't exist because you wouldn't know what HR classification you would put her in relative to our institution. We'd just hire her and we'd pay her appropriately. And not only that, but there's a rule on how much more we're allowed to pay her. It's a certain percent. And that moment was one I felt completely confident cashing all the chips in and saying, okay, I'm probably not getting another thing from HR for another year in terms of any flexibility or negotiation, but this is not okay. And you know, I was willing to spend the hours in the room talking about several $1,000s because it was worth it. One, it was going to make a difference in this person's life and it was the right thing to do. But two, it was bigger than that one person. It was about a systemic issue that was going to hold a lot of people back if we didn't find a way to resolve it. Those are the moments when we cross over a line where something is either morally, ethically, foundationally wrong with the thing we're doing, that is often accompanied with me moving a little bit north of that calm. And they're limited. Like I said, I can get on board with almost everything once I leave my ego at the door. Not things that are wrong foundationally. Can't do that.
You know, I love this story, TJ, because done with integrity, you did what you talked about trying to help others understand earlier, which is build credibility. So despite the fact that was probably an uncomfortable moment for you and certainly for HR,
oh yeah,
done the way you did it, built credibility for lots of people in your organization because it caused people to think differently about what matters, the things you stand up for as a division, what the value system is, and actually helped HR do their jobs a little bit better there too. So done well, I think you built credibility in the way that you wanted to earlier.
Yeah, I'd hope, and I think I did with a few people. I will tell you, Loren, there were a few folks I didn't make friends with there, right? Like the compensation analysts who essentially felt as though I was telling them that the job they were doing wasn't appropriate for this context. And the other part of it that I think is important is the staff member who got she got it. We got what we wanted, who got the ultimate opportunity, and the folks who reported to her do not know and will never know that war went on. And to me, it's that's okay. You know, you don't do the right thing because everybody's watching, everybody knows. You do the right thing because it's the right thing. But I think along with that story comes this assumption that, oh, you were a champion of the people and then you got celebrated. No, I was a champion for the right thing, and the people who were impacted may never, ever, ever know what went into that conversation.
Right. You know, earlier you said you believe in saying the quiet things out loud, and I wonder if that may have been one of those examples, but I wonder if there are things that you think most leaders need to hear, but people are afraid to tell them.
Oh yeah, I think there's you know, I think about this all the time, and here's one thing that I often say to my staff to maybe explain human behavior in organizations. I think people do what they are incentivized to do. That's a mantra that I share with folks. And I ask them to think, you know, if someone's behaving in a way or they're acting in a way and you don't love it, instead of assuming they're just a bad person or they have bad intent, ask yourself, what is that person? Why are they incentivized to do that thing? Because particularly in a work context, people want to be successful. They want to provide for their life or their family or whatever it is, and they're going to do the thing that they're incentivized to do to be able to do that. I say all that to say that I've been thinking an awful lot lately about the role of gatekeepers in the work, particularly for leaders. And, you know, we have gotten the business of appointing all these gatekeepers who are incentivized to share information that is positive, to shield information that is negative, to overly filter things, to dampen problems, to ensure that an agenda that maybe isn't even well informed is able to be executed, because that's the thing that they're incentivized to do. And so I think there's a whole host of things that leaders need to know or understand or be told that they don't know. And a big part of that issue is gatekeepers. And so one of the things I've challenged myself to do is to ask staff. I walk around between meetings constantly. I'm a guy. I tell staff, I have keys. I'm going to use them. And I between meetings, I'm walking through buildings. I'm walking through break rooms. And if I get a conversation with a staff member, what I want to know is, what are the problems that you assume I know about, but I probably don't? Or what? Because staff do. They assume, well, he knows about that and he's not worried about it. Or he knows about that and he's got a plan for it. And the chances are, I actually have no idea. And you'd be shocked some of the things you uncover that you go, oh my gosh, why are we doing that? Or I had no idea that was happening. Or I had no idea that was even a problem. And so I think there's a whole host of things that leaders don't know that they need to, and I put them in the big bucket of the things that staff assume they know because they don't understand all the layers that go up to how information flows. And we're often missing those things.
Mm-hmm.
When you say gatekeeper, say more about that. Like, who's a gatekeeper? Give us an example of a gatekeeper and how they're operating.
That could be an admin assistant. That could be there's plenty of folks who sort of control how information gets to some, and that's one of the things. So I recently did had an interview process for somebody who is going to be an admin assistant and support me and a couple of my direct reports. And in the interview process, I said, I want you to be a facilitator, not a gatekeeper. I want people to see you as someone who helps them solve a problem, not someone they have to circumvent to get to me. So I don't need you to protect my time. I don't need you to, my door's open as a policy for a reason, particularly where we are in the development of our organization right now. So if somebody's looking to find time with me, your job is to find the time with me. It's not to try to protect my time because I'm busy tomorrow. And it's me being clear about, I don't want you to be a gatekeeper. I've said the same thing to my direct reports who are all directors or senior directors. I've said, if your staff want to get to me, instead of trying to stop that, ask yourself why. What is the reason? What is the thing? What is the problem that they feel they either don't have an outlet to share, or that maybe we haven't shared the story as to the why that helps them understand that we're on the right course? And once we start doing that, they don't want to come spend time in my office to complain about you. They want to spend time in my office to say hi maybe, or share a story about their family, or we can talk through some things, and I'm going to visit them too. But they won't seek me out if you're the leader who they trust. Right. And so ask yourself the why instead of looking for ways to kind of create the barrier or put the gatekeeping up.
Yeah, that's good. That makes sense. You've used the word trust a few times. Trust is something that I continually think about. I think is, do you trust someone? Do you not trust someone? Do we trust the systems that we're working in? Do we even trust the system? Do we trust the man? I feel like that's where I'm going with this. I don't even.
Who is that? Yeah.
Who is the man? I don't know. Or the woman. But when you think about trust in your leadership journey, where you are, how have you contributed to it? Is it something intentional that you work on with yourself, with teams? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, to me, trust is the absolute cornerstone of trying to run a good and healthy organization where people want to be. And I think the basics of trust, as simple as it sounds, is reminding folks. I had to do this work a ton at my last institution, particularly early on. You have to do the things you say you're going to do. And so, you're going to find yourself in leadership roles where you show up. And we're almost like politicians sometimes as we interview, right? We have a platform. We're going to do this, 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 and this, and it's going to be great. And for staff who have worked at an institution a long time or an organization they've heard that before. They've heard the speech or the platform or the whatever it is. What they want to see is, are you going to do the thing you said you're going to do? So yeah, first you have to show up and be honest and say, this is who I am, and this is how I operate, and this is what I'm going to do. Then you have to show up and do it. And then, believe it or not, you have to remind them that you said you were going to do it, and then you did it. And then you have to keep doing it. I remember an instance at an institution where, we had our own internal facility staff. And the facility staff very early on asked me, they said, hey, what's your opinion on centralized facilities? Because the central group wants to take us over. That was their feeling from years of rather rumors or something like that. And I said, well, I believe as long as we can do this work at an appropriate cost, price point, and add a higher quality of service to our residents, then I believe in us having our own staff. I believe that being a housekeeping staff, for example, in a residence hall is very different than a classroom. I think you play an important role in the lives of our students. And so this is what I believe in. And they all like that answer. Well, fast forward 6 months, and we were in a summer period, and we were having a hard time getting our buildings turned over while also trying to maintain some of our more public community spaces like unions and cafeterias, things like that. And so what I did was I went to the central facilities folks and I said, hey, we need some help just getting some of these spaces done. And what we'll do is just to make sure that we have enough labor to get these buildings turned, which is priority one, we're going to do work orders to you to do these things, and we'll pay you for that, and we'll do this. And it allows us to prioritize. And one, it probably wasn't communicated the best way, because the director of facilities at the time went forward and sent a note and said, hey, from this point forward, for these things, send it to the central facility staff, right? So granted, the communication wasn't the best, but what we learned really was the trust wasn't the best, because a handful of staff members said, aha, they sold out. And I mean, they sent this big email to everybody, the entire facility staff. They've sold out. They're going to centralize us. This is it. I told you this was going to happen, the whole 9 yards. And somebody sent me the email and said, here, I just want you to know what's going around. And I said, okay. So I went to the admin coordinator. I said, I want everybody in the room tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And I went in the room and I stood in front of the room and I explained the situation. I said, we have to prioritize this first, blah, blah, blah. And I said, now, I know this note's gone around and I know what people are saying and thinking. Let me reiterate. I said this to you on this date, that I believe in this thing. And I want you to know I wasn't lying to you. The bad news is there's some folks in this room that no matter what I do are never going to trust me. But the good news for all of you is, whether you trust me or not, I'm going to do exactly what I said I was going to do. And that was it. That was the entire meeting. And I said, and I went to walk out of the room and somebody stopped me and he said, hey, wait, we're sorry. And I said, no. This is not me browbeating anybody. Nobody needs to apologize. Great organizations are going to have these kinds of difficult conversations. This will not be the last time we have a difficult conversation. This is what we have to do as a family to be a great organization. So you don't need to apologize to me. I'm going to continue to do what I say I was going to do. And hopefully someday we're all going to trust each other. And that was it. That was the conversation. But I think that's a nice little microcosm for it. Like trust was so important to me that I felt we needed to call it out in that moment and say, we need to communicate better. Yes, but I hope you'll trust me in the future because we're going to do what we said we were going to do.
I appreciate you sharing those stories, and I'm thinking a little bit as you were talking about how early in my career, TJ, I feel maybe I am with this podcast. I feel like I need to apologize to everybody in the first 5 years of my career for whom I was responsible for being so bad at it. Being so inexperienced at supervision and leadership and trust building and culture setting and all those things. I'm wondering if you think back to the early parts of your career, are there moments that were so pivotal, and maybe even challenging to your sense of accomplishment and just your confidence that taught you something? And I suspect that I hope there are people listening who certainly early in their careers, but at other points, at any point in your career, have those moments. Can you talk a little bit about, particularly early in your career, maybe?
I got a bunch of them. I will tell you, the first part of advice I would give folks as they think about these moments is, I hope people are actively paying attention and bookmarking these moments in their head, because they're going to come back and you're going to think about them. And, Loren, you've probably done this. I've done, where you think back and you go, oh, that was the moment where I learned the thing, or it was a turn or a pivot or whatever it is. So I would ask folks that when these moments happen, sometimes they hurt, they don't feel good, they challenge you, bookmark it. Mm-hmm. Bookmark it. Remember how you respond, because it's going to matter later.
Let me ask you a question about what you've learned from the pandemic, because people in your role, and there are others certainly at most institutions who are responsible now for the response. And I'd like to say but in many cases, obviously it's still happening. But what has being responsible for the delivery systems, the response of the institution to COVID, the service to families and students and others on campus taught you about higher education, and taught you about people you can count on or not count on? That's a little broad, but I want to do that intentionally.
Yeah, I think at its foundation, it taught us we can, right? We can pivot very, very quickly if we need to do the thing. I remember early on in the pandemic, I guess it was months into sort of the work from home phase where everybody was at home except for our frontline staff. I was tweeting about how, higher ed was so slow to move. And someone on Twitter challenged me and said, no, look how quick higher ed pivoted. Higher ed went completely online in a short period of time, and everybody turned, and the whole nine. And my response to that was, they pivoted when they had to. right? They didn't proactively, they reactively pivoted. And so I learned that we can, and that's great news. That's optimistic news. The bigger question mark for me, Loren, is will we? Will we proactively, or will we wait until we have to every time? We only pivoted because we had to. We were doing things during the pandemic and even since that were unimaginable 3-4 years ago, right? If I told you we were going to deliver counseling and consultation online, most institutions would say, nope, that's not the model. And then we did it and everybody went, oh, I guess we can. Or, classes can be online. Students can still live on campus and they went, oh, that's not the model. Well, I guess we can. We're delivering things now. Heck, we were doing guests on campus through student activities over Zoom. And for some students, that was a much better way to consume it because they weren't comfortable in the other environments. So the big optimistic takeaway for me is that we can do anything. The bigger question mark is will we?
Yeah,
and will we do it proactively? Now, in terms of quality of people and who you can rely on, it's mind-numbing to me how some people stepped up in this thing. One, we saw a ton of folks who were just selfless and said, whatever this institution needs, I'm going to do it. And they stepped forward and did it. But and most of those folks were sort of in roles that their job and the relevance of their job changed relative to the pandemic. And they went, okay, well, what do I have to do? How do I chip in? How do I contribute? And that was great. I think what was even greater was some of the most forgotten staff, our frontline staff, particularly like housekeeping, maintenance, some of those staff that work in residential dining facilities, places like that. They carried the water for every institution. They showed up every day. They didn't get to work from home. They put their personal safety in danger. At least that was the lived experience at the time throughout this pandemic. And they did it dutifully. And I think that as a result of this pandemic, we've seen what was a gap, an equity gap, a lived equity gap. We've only seen it get bigger. And that's one of my biggest concerns. So, I've got a laptop here sitting on my desk. I can take a meeting. I can talk to you from anywhere in the world. I can do my job from almost anywhere in the world. They cannot. And so I got all these benefits out of the pandemic from that, what we can do. There were a lot of takeaways in terms of work-life balance and flexibility and all the things we can do. There's a laptop class of people, but there's that other class of people that got zero of those benefits.
Yeah.
And now the push for us is how do we give them the benefits? How do we modernize the work environment for staff who carried the water for us over several very, very hard years?
Yeah, the inequities were real, and they were pointed out in the housing staff and the dining staff and the custodial staffs. The facility staffs were so hard at work, and most of the systems aren't necessarily built in response to serve them. And I think those inequities really got pointed out for sure.
Well, it points to I think a systemic issue with the way that we are structured, which is that we are a rules-based environment, not a results-based environment. If you can take a rules-based work environment and change it to a results-based work environment, I think you can bridge that equity gap a little bit. But when I tell a housekeeping staff member that their literal job is to arrive at 7, take a break at 10, eat lunch at 11:30 and go home at 3:30 and in the middle try to get some stuff cleaned, then I've based it on rules. But if I tell you your job is to get here when it's convenient for you, make sure you clean this to level 2 APA standards and then get home at a time that's convenient. And if you have a doctor's appointment, no big deal. Now I've made it results-based and I've given them some flexibility that they never had before. That's a huge paradigm shift, a huge mindset shift. But I think we're going to have to start thinking that way if we're going to bridge some of those inequity gaps.
Well, in the hybrid remote world, that's going to be essential. There's just no way in a distributed model you can, I would presume, I mean, this is maybe a question, I'm making it a statement here, but it's going to be very difficult in a hybrid remote world to be observing with your own eyes the productivity. You have to actually count on other kinds of incentives, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you say that's the case?
That's the beauty of podcasting is you can just make statements, Loren.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's this is where leadership gets even harder. And I think some of those early on lessons in our lives are how you show up as a leader, and communication, trust, all of this becomes really important because you have to have those difficult conversations. It's so easy to look at a clock and be like, 7:35, you're not here. I've said throughout my career to people, if I'm watching the clock, you're not doing the job I care about. So the instant you hear something come out of my mouth that is about time, and you not being here, we need to have a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I share that with people so that they know, they help me check myself when I'm not having the difficult conversations. Because there's times where you get busy, you think about it, and you're like, it's easier for me to fall back to the clock.
Yeah.
Than it is to actually say, hey, this report or this thing or this program, we need you to show up in this way, be there for these people in this type of, it's just a harder conversation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's harder work. Being a leader is much harder than being a manager.
And I think we've set it up where everyone, if you're not striving to be that next point in your career, you're failing. When in reality, I would love for people to start talking about and thinking more about what work do I really want to spend my time doing?
Absolutely.
And then be very happy, great, content at that job and in doing that work. But I think to me, that's a societal shift, but higher ed has a microcosm of that mentality.
Yeah.
If you're not striving to be a director or an AVP, the reality is there's only so many AVPs and VPs and presidents.
The whole system is really organized around rank.
That's right.
Yep.
Right. I mean, and our, to your point earlier, TJ, about HR systems, the HR systems, the space allocation, how much square footage?
Right.
I mean, I don't know if you've worked at universities where this is the case. The space allocation is based on titles and ranks, more square footage with more, more
That's
title.
right. That's
so
right.
it's sort of.
I think TJ has a couch in his office.
It's so funny because we're doing. It's not a couch back there. We're
cushion chairs.
We're looking at space right now, and that's actually part of the premise, right? Is that the space that we allocate should be based on the job function. What is the thing you have to do? And as we've had, I don't mind saying this publicly in this podcast forum where the whole world can hear it because I've said it here as well. If I have to be the first guy to say, take my office away and I'll work out of a hoteling cubicle as long as I have access to a conference room and I need a private meeting or whatever it is, I'll be that guy. Because someone needs to start the process of unfurling all of this structure built around status and rank and space and things and start to assign things based on job. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right, Loren. There's a lot of work to do there, and the entire structure is built around status and rank.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What was college age, Kent State University, TJ Logan like?
So I already shared with you, I was a first everything kind of college student. So a big part of my college experience, particularly early on, was that I was clueless, right? I didn't know the secret language. I didn't know the things to do. I didn't know any of it. And so there was a bit of cluelessness and lostness that made up my identity, particularly early on, like I said. The other part was that I was really focused. And not in the way that a good student is, but I was really focused in a way that a person who was paying for their own education was. In that I felt that I had very little room for things that weren't getting that done, weren't making sure I got the education and got it paid for. So I had a job always. I had a job during the summer. I would work 40, 50, 60 hours a week to make sure that during the school year, I could work a number of hours that was more sustainable with classes. I was a guy that did the opening shift at the rec center. I was opening the building at 5 a.m. every morning as a freshman, and nobody wanted that shift. I happily took that shift. I was a little bit non-traditional in the number of hours I was working, and it was probably a little bit unbalanced to some extent. My freshman GPA, you've looked up the records, I had a 1.7. I was not invited to return after my first semester because I was struggling academically so much. And I wasn't prepared to be a college student and had to figure out how to do those things. All of those things, all of that, particularly the adversity around the academics and things like that. One, it put a chip on my shoulder that, after that first semester, really, I had that chip on my shoulder that I have to prove to myself and the world that I can do this, that I'm good enough to do the thing. My dad sat me down my junior year of high school. And while most people are saying, like, let's have the college conversation, my dad opened the conversation with, not everybody goes to college. And what I heard him say was, we don't think you can hack it. And that's probably not what he was saying, but that's what I heard. And so that chip got bigger and bigger and bigger, especially as I failed that first semester. I had to prove that I could do the thing. And so that's how I moved out of my first year there. I was intensely focused on work and making sure that I can make this affordable and pay for it. And that's what led to student leadership. I lived in a residence hall with a bunch of folks who were involved in the Residence Hall Association. And I remember one day that the guy let slip out of his mouth this notion of how he gets free housing and food. And I said, hold on, what are you talking about? He said, oh, I'm the president of this Residence Hall Association, and my compensation is I get free food, free housing, and I get this $70 a month stipend. And I went, time out. That's huge to me. That's everything to me when you're paying for your own education. So the first ever Residence Hall Association meeting I went to was the elections. And I ran. So I showed up. I introduced myself.
There's the moxie.
And I said, I would like to be your next vice president for administrative affairs. And they elected me, which was crazy. And that's really where the leadership conversations start, where I stopped thinking about work and started thinking about leadership a little bit. But all that aside, I think I was primed to fall through all the cracks, and I was very, very lucky to have a series of things happen to me that allowed me to fall far enough to get a chip on my shoulder to continue to grind through it.
TJ, I want to ask, I know Kelsey's been wanting to ask, what's next? Where are you? What's next? And the spin I want to put on that is, are you ever, and there's a little bit of me coming on this, are you ever surprised about where you are?
All the time.
And I say that in two ways. One is I often felt like I am just a small town guy who got lucky. There's another part of me that wasn't an exact fit for most of the roles in higher education I had, but I managed to sort of love all the intersections of all the things that were systemically and structurally sort of written a certain way. But I suspect that you sort of navigate in the same way. I don't know that. I'd like you to comment on that. But are you ever surprised about where you are, and does that ever reflect an observation of higher ed that makes, therefore, the fit interesting or different or challenging? Or you see where I'm coming at that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I definitely am surprised at where I am. I think sometimes, I was a fine arts major in my undergrad. My grandfather was a professional painter. That was my only real skill in life, and it was something that I pursued in college, and decided I didn't want to do that as a career. So I have a bachelor's degree in fine arts and painting. I have an MBA because I thought that was going to be the next most logical thing to sustain a career doing something. And then I have a doctoral degree in educational technology, of all things. So I'm surprised, one, because of my background and where I came from. There was no math that should have got me where I'm at, and that does surprise me sometimes. But I'm also a real oddity, like yourself, Loren, in higher ed, right? I've got a different kind of background. I've got a different perspective. I'm a maker. I'm a creator. One of my favorite books is Leadership by Design, I think it's called. From the president, he was the former president of the Rhode Island School of Design, and his name is eluding me at the moment. But he writes about being a leader as an artist and why that, and how that's different, and how you lead as an artist. And it impacted me in a big way. So how does that impact? I mean, I'm surprised, I think, all the time as I look around, and maybe more than surprised, I'm grateful. But I think, going back to the pandemic, what that time period really meant for me was maybe coming to terms with who I am and being okay with it. I think we find ourselves in a field that has a real common path to it and a real common backgrounds to it and experiences. And I wasn't that. And I always had chips on my shoulder because of that. And I think I finally have really come to terms with, you don't have to be that. You're this. You're this guy who's got a really unique background. You've done some really, really interesting things in your career. You love to create. You use your outlet as a leader to do some of that sometimes. You are much more engaged strategically in leadership than you are in the weeds and tactical pieces, and that's okay. And I had to come to terms with that. And what it's meant for me in the way that I work is, one, I tend to favor people with really non-traditional backgrounds. And I like to give people a chance. So I hired somebody as a director of conference operations who was a regional Starbucks manager once. He had no master's degree. Everybody said you can't hire somebody in a director role without that. He tripled the revenue in that operation in 2 years, paid for himself over and over and over again. And it's just, being able to find those gems and look for ways. So that's one of the ways it's manifested itself for me. The others that I've really, to answer that sort of what's next question, I've come to terms with this idea of what matters to me. And the only thing that matters to me is that I'm doing work that matters with people I like. It is very, very simple. Am I doing work that matters with people that I like? And when the balance of my time is not spent doing that, when I'm not doing that most of the time, I'm going to get pretty unhappy pretty quickly. That's just me coming to terms with who I am. Yeah. So that has nothing to do with title. That has nothing to do, like I get, you leave your ego at the door, and I gave up on the whole, I need to be here by this age and this by this and make this much. Am I doing stuff that matters with people I like? And if I am, it's going to be all right.
Very good. You mentioned painting, and I want to just take a moment to say, I know really the profession lost a person who's very close to you, Teresa Powell at Temple, and you created just an absolutely stunning painting just 2 weeks ago. Is it about?
It was almost 2 weeks ago. It's sitting on the corner of my desk now.
Well, it's absolutely beautiful and
Thank you.
Really nice tribute, and frankly helped, I think, anybody who knew her also reflect on her too. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, stay tuned. The original piece has been shipped to Texas, where it will hang on the wall of her only surviving and oldest sister. But there are 100 limited prints that have been run that are numbered and signed. Those will be sold to support a scholarship in her name here at Ohio State. She literally changed the world. Not to get off on a tangent about Teresa Powell, but she changed the world. And I was sitting at her wake in Texas this past week, and there was a congressperson there. There were 2 university presidents. There was a half dozen vice presidents throughout the country. There were people from everywhere. And I looked around and thought, how lucky am I to have had this person in my life the way I did? She changed the world, and she did it because she invested in other people. And I think this scholarship's going to help invest in other people.
Yeah,
carry that
that's fabulous.
Fabulous.
Hey, Loren, I feel like it's some time for some extra credit.
Okay. I'm a little nervous.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good thing.
Because you have an idea about what it is.
I do. Well, what I find fascinating is we just finished our 3rd interview, so our first 3 guests for the podcast, and they all self-described their college years as being nerds.
Yeah, it is important to say that they self-labeled. This isn't us labeling
That's right.
people as nerds, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then you and I had a chit-chat, and I don't think I would self-describe myself as a nerd in college. How about you?
No, I would not say nerd. Sometimes I'm surprised I graduated, actually.
Same.
And I don't think most of the people with whom I interacted, faculty, staff, administrators, would ever describe me as bookish in college.
I mean, I had some textbooks that I never took out of the plastic and then took back for that end of the year, $2 of cash in your pocket.
Yeah. Not a good return on your investment. No. Those weren't business classes, were they?
No. But I will say I attended every single class. I was a good attendance record. I just didn't like reading.
You were very responsible.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's a Midwest trait of like that you show up.
Mm-hmm. Why? So you mentioned that they all 3 self-described as nerds. They didn't use that. Did they use that word, nerd?
I mean, I think
all 3?
Pretty nerdy, responsible.
Yeah.
Held multiple jobs.
So what does that say about, does it say more about them or us?
I think it's interesting that maybe we are the ones that sought people out for the interviews, and
all the things we're not, we wanted to have on the first three. I don't know.
I think that's
great
possible.
leaders, nerdish, responsible, accomplished.
I don't know, but I'm quite fascinated to see where our next guests take us.
Campus Confidential is presented by Compass Group, produced by Corey Inscoe and Jen Fisher, with your hosts, Kelsey, Harmon, Finn, and Loren Rullman.